Have you ever wondered how your brain stores all the information you feed it every day? It's a question that piques the curiosity of many, and the answer is more fascinating than one might imagine. Unlike the computers we use, our brains don't have a physical hard drive where data is stowed away. Instead, they operate on a system that's far more intricate and dynamic. The human brain, a biological marvel, uses a complex network of synaptic connections between neurons to store information. Imagine billions of neurons, each one connected to thousands of others, creating a vast network that's constantly buzzing with activity. These connections are not static. They're alive and ever-changing. They can strengthen or weaken over time, a process that plays a crucial role in the formation of memories. Let's take a walk, for instance. As you stroll down a familiar path, your brain is not pulling up a saved file of the walk like a computer would. Instead, it's activating a specific pattern of synaptic connections that have been strengthened by repeated experiences of that walk. This dynamic nature of the brain's information storage allows us to learn, adapt, and grow. When we learn something new, our brain forms new connections or strengthens existing ones. When we stop using certain information, the corresponding connections weaken or disappear, making room for new ones. Interestingly, this is the opposite of how computers store data. Computers rely on hard drives and other storage devices to maintain the state of their information. They can't form or break connections based on usage and experience. Their storage is static, unchanging unless manually altered. However, this is not to say that one method is superior to the other. Both have their own strengths and limitations. The static nature of computer storage allows for precise, reliable retrieval of information, while the dynamic nature of the brain storage allows for adaptability and growth. So, unlike computers, our brains don't have a hard drive. Instead, they have a vast interconnected network of neurons that constantly adapt and change. This, in essence, is the brain's unique information storehouse. Now, let's shift our attention to artificial neural networks. How do they store information? Artificial neural networks, or ANs, are computing systems inspired by the human brain's network of neurons. Yet, they store and process information in a very different way. Unlike the brain, which forms memories through the strengthening and weakening of synaptic connections between neurons, ANs rely on data storage to maintain the state of synaptic weights. Let's break that down a bit. In an artificial neural network, each neuron or node is connected to many others. These connections, or synapses, have a weight associated with them, which adjusts as the network learns. This weight determines the influence of one node on another, much like the strength of a connection between two neurons in a biological brain. However, there's a key difference. To remember these weights, artificial neural networks require some form of data storage. This could be a hard drive, a solid-state drive, or even cloud storage. This storage device holds the record of these synaptic weights, allowing the network to recall learned information and apply it to new data. Why is this necessary? Well, imagine trying to navigate a city without a map or GPS. It'd be pretty tough, right? Similarly, without a way to remember the weights of its synapses, an artificial neural network would struggle to learn from past experiences and apply that knowledge to future tasks. This storage reliance is a key distinction between artificial and biological neural networks. While our brains are constantly adjusting and strengthening connections to form memories, artificial neural networks must store these changes externally. They require a map in the form of data storage to maintain the state of their synaptic weights and navigate the complex landscape of information processing. In essence, artificial neural networks learn and remember, not through the fluid, dynamic connections of a biological brain, but through the rigid, static storage of data in an external device. In contrast to our brains, these artificial networks rely on data storage devices such as hard drives to remember and learn. It's fascinating how artificial neural networks mimic the human brain, isn't it? This is where we start our exploration of the intriguing parallels and contrasts between the two systems. Our brain, a biological neural network, is a marvel of nature. It doesn't rely on hard drives or flash drives to store information. Instead, it uses a complex network of synaptic connections between neurons. These connections can strengthen or weaken over time, creating a dynamic memory bank. This is the brain's way of forming memories and learning. Every thought, every memory, every bit of knowledge we accumulate is encoded in these synaptic connections, forming a vast, intricate web of information storage. On the other hand, artificial neural networks, inspired by their biological counterparts, operate a bit differently. They too use the concept of synaptic connections to store information. However, they typically require some form of physical data storage to maintain the state of these synaptic weights. This is essential for their ability to learn and remember. So, while the human brain and artificial neural networks both use synaptic connections to store information, they differ in their need for physical data storage. The brain's synaptic connections are constantly changing, strengthening or weakening based on new experiences and learning. This constant change is what allows us to learn and adapt. Meanwhile, artificial neural networks need to store the state of these connections in some physical form to keep track of what they've learned. In essence, both systems, though different in their mechanics, adhere to the same fundamental principle. They both use the concept of synaptic connections to store and process information. The brain does it through a complex network of neurons, constantly changing and adapting, while artificial neural networks do it through a system of weighted connections, stored in some physical form. Though both systems have their unique ways of storing information, they share the fundamental principle of using synaptic connections. This is the common thread that binds them together in their quest to store, process, and understand information. So, what does the future hold for information storage in artificial neural networks? Well, my friends, the future is not only bright, but it's also quite fascinating. In recent years, we've seen significant advancements in physical neural networks. These advancements are moving us away from the need for conventional data storage devices, such as hard drives, and closer to the way our own brains store information. Just imagine an artificial neural network operating just like the human brain, storing information through a complex network of synaptic connections. These connections can strengthen or weaken over time, forming memories and learning new things, without the need for bulky data storage. Sounds like science fiction, right? But it's not. It's the reality we are moving towards. This advancement in physical neural networks is largely due to the development of neuromorphic computing. Neuromorphic computing uses very large-scale integration systems containing electronic analog circuits to mimic neurobiological architectures present in the nervous system. It's all about creating hardware that can mimic the neural processing that occurs in our brains. This includes the plasticity of synapses, which allows the strength of connections to change, and thus, memories to form. What this means for the future of information storage is nothing short of revolutionary. It means we could have artificial neural networks that learn and remember in a way that's much more akin to how we humans do it. But it's not just about creating a more efficient way to store information. It's also about creating a more natural and intuitive way for artificial neural networks to learn and adapt. This could have profound implications for the development of smarter, more adaptable artificial intelligence systems. So, the future of information storage in artificial neural networks? It's looking more and more like our own brains. As technology evolves, we are moving towards a future where artificial neural networks can store information just like our brains do. A future where the line between artificial and biological becomes even more blurred. A future that's not only exciting, but full of endless possibilities. Let's recap what we've learned today. Our journey began with an exploration of the human brain and its complex system of storing information. Unlike the data storage devices we're familiar with, such as hard drives, the brain uses a network of synaptic connections between neurons to form and store memories. These connections can strengthen or weaken over time, allowing us to remember, forget, and learn new things. From there, we delved into the world of artificial neural networks. Inspired by our biological neural networks, these artificial systems have been designed to emulate the way our brains work. However, they've typically required some form of data storage to maintain the state of synaptic weights, which are crucial for their learning and memory capabilities. This is where a key difference lies between our brains and these artificial networks. We then spent some time comparing and contrasting these two types of neural networks. While they share a common principle, their methods of storing information are fundamentally different. Biological networks rely on the dynamic nature of synaptic connections, whereas artificial networks have traditionally leaned on conventional data storage devices. But the landscape is changing. We discussed how advancements in physical neural networks are beginning to challenge this norm. With the development of new technologies, artificial networks are now capable of performing learning and memory tasks without the need for conventional data storage. This is a significant leap forward in bridging the gap between biological and artificial neural networks. So, while our brains and artificial neural networks have different ways of storing information, the gap between them is slowly but surely closing. Who knows what the future holds? Perhaps one day we'll see artificial neural networks that can store and process information just like our brains do. But until then, we'll continue to marvel at the complexity of our own neural networks and the incredible potential of their artificial counterparts.